Not every NHL team has played one game yet, but it's time to overreact.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. I am Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers. That is my good friend and one of the co-hosts of Locked On Penguins, Hunter Hodies, and we want to thank everyone that is making Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every single day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Head to FanDuel.com, download the FanDuel app, place a $5 bet, and if your first $5 bet wins, you'll win $300 in bonus bets. Hunter, my friends, not every team has played so far. There is one team that's played 2 games, the LA Kings, so we can have maybe a bit more to discern from that, but I have written down one take about all of the teams who have played a game so far, and we're going to decide whether or not that's an overreaction or not. So we're going to start with my Edmonton Oilers, who played a really good game for 35 minutes, an abysmal game for 5 minutes, and then an okay game for the end of regulation, overtime, and then lost in the 8th round of the shootout last night. And I have written down the Oilers' defense will be better than their forward group this year. And I say that as the take because that forward group, once you get past McDavid and Draisaitl, especially this first month without Zach Hyman, it's a lot of question marks. Like Mangiapane had his first point as an Oiler. Tomaszek had his first NHL point after coming over from Europe. But that forward group leaves a lot to be desired.
Right. I mean, and they lost a lot during the offseason. Once you get past, Darnell Nurse defensively, I really actually do like a good chunk of this defensive core. I love Ekholm. He just signed an extension. Obviously,
he looked good last night.
Yeah. You still have Bouchard, of course. You have Kulak. Jake Wallman, when healthy, Nick, is fantastic. So I actually do like a lot of the pieces here. Again, even outside of Darnell Nurse, who I think is an anchor to the defensive group. But I don't really mind that take. I thought you were going to do something on the goalies because Stuart Skinner allowed an absolute howler to tie the game early on in the third period where he was just out to lunch there. But no, I don't think that's too much of an overreaction because, outside of McDavid, who, he's probably going to finish with 140 plus points, probably can say the same for Draisaitl. I think when Hyman comes back, he's going to be great. You have Nugent Hopkins, who will give you over a point per game. There are a lot of question marks. I still want to see more from Matt Savoy. Like, how does he do for a full season? I want to see more from Isaac Howard. This is his NHL debut. He made his NHL debut last night, Nick. So I'm curious to see how that goes. But yeah, like especially in the bottom 6, as of right now, we're 1 game in. It's not as deep as it was last year. So we'll see.
Next up, for the Flames, who won that game in the shootout, I have the Flames. The Flames are going to make the playoffs. And I wrote that down purely because I loved what I saw from the young guys last night. I mean, the guys they had making their NHL debuts, they looked the part. They had that one line of guys who was all 6'4" or taller. Their defense, I think, is pretty underrated, at least as far as on paper goes. Oh, yeah, and Dustin Wolf might be a top 5 goalie in the NHL. It's not the craziest thing in the world to envision a world where maybe the Blues take a step back, maybe the Flames are a little bit better than we expect, and they're in the mix come February, and maybe they pull off another funky Joel Farabee, Morgan Frost type trade as a reward for the type of season they're having. I don't think it's extremely likely, but I could see a world where the Flames make the playoffs.
I think it's an overreaction for me right now. 1 game in, I think they're going to be in the race, but Nick, when I look at the West, the 3 teams in the Pacific, especially, Vegas, Edmonton, and LA, I have those 3 teams making it. The Central is going to be a bloodbath, but, I have Colorado making it. I have Dallas making it, for example. I have Minnesota getting in. Winnipeg, I still have getting in, but probably as a wild card team. And I had the prediction for the Hockey News, Nick. I have the Utah Mammoth getting in this year. I think defensively they're good enough. They have good forwards. I love the Peterka trade, and I think they'll get good goaltending. But the Flames are going to be right in that conversation. It's a small overreaction, but if everything goes their way, Dustin Wolf plays like he did last night throughout the entire year, they get good contributions from some of their young guys, and you mix in some good contributions from their veterans, I could see them potentially getting that final playoff spot in the Western Conference. I think it's going to come down to them, Utah, and St. Louis. but I'm going to go right now Utah, but we'll see.
For the Pittsburgh Penguins, Dan Muse is the right guy to lead this team through the wilderness.
We'll see. I think we'll park that. I think it's to be determined, but I like a lot of what I saw on Tuesday. It's only one game, but the way that they forechecked was awesome. The Rangers could not break the puck out of their own zone to save their lives. And even in the third period, when the Penguins were defending that lead, it never felt like it was in jeopardy. There was a lot of one and dones for the Rangers. They couldn't get anything going, whether it was off the rush, their cycle game, you name it. They literally could not get anything going. The Penguins did a great job selling out in front of the net, limiting the Rangers to the outside. Archer Shilovs gets the shutout, even though he didn't have to face too many high danger chances. It was honestly the best I've seen the Penguins defend in a full game in several years, if I'm being completely honest. That's how rough the end of the Mike Sullivan era was. But I did like a lot of what I saw from Dan Muse, and if they play like that in a lot more games this season, I'm going to probably arrive there with that take.
So the one other thing I would add is an addendum, and obviously, first game of the season, Malkin looked good. Malkin's leg looked really fresh. He looked a lot more engaged. And to your point, the Penguins, with, I wouldn't say the most talented group, came out with a really good game plan and really found a way to make the Rangers struggle, to make the Rangers uncomfortable, to have to work harder. And that brings me to the last take of our first segment about those New York Rangers. Mike Sullivan doesn't know what he signed up for. And I think this is going to be a lot harder than he might have assumed it was going to be. Because on paper, the Rangers are a talented hockey team. But actually getting the results out of this group is going to be more difficult than just filling out the lineup card. And I don't think Mike Sullivan is that presumptive that all he needed to do was show up and the team would play better than it did last year. But Tuesday night looked a lot like what we saw from the Rangers last year on a team that was dead in the water by February. So I am definitely a bit concerned, and not aggregate wise, but I think this is going to be a challenge for Mike Sullivan to get this team to play the way he wants it to.
I just don't think he has the personnel to run the system that he wants to run. Like, Nick, when you think of the 2016-2017 Penguins, what do you think of?
The buzzsaw forecheck.
Yes, that insane forecheck, speed, and more speed. The Rangers don't have that. Like, I saw a very slow team on Tuesday night, which is saying something because the Penguins are still very old and they are not very fast in today's NHL. They're not the New Jersey Devils, Nick, or the Carolina Hurricanes, or even the Panthers, for example. They are not that fast, but they made the Rangers look even slower than expected. And I think some of the Rangers players are a bit hurt. JT Miller looked awful. He very much looks like he is hurt. I think Panarin is battling something as well. Fox didn't look good. But I agree with your overall take. I wish Sullivan good luck there. It's going to take a lot, in my opinion, for him to get that team to the playoffs. I don't have them as a playoff team this year. I just think there's too many question marks, Nick. Like, the top six, I don't mind it, but a lot of the players up there are getting older. The bottom six is just full of guys. And then the last two pairings, they don't really inspire that much confidence.
That defense is bad.
Yeah,
defense is bad.
They have one guy that can move the puck up the ice at an elite level. I think Gavrikov can also do a decent job at it because he's the best partner Adam Fox has ever had. But outside of that pairing, you don't really have much on the back end. And then Shesterkin can only do so much.
He can't score too.
Yeah, so I agree with that take. I really am nervous for Mike Sullivan there. I just don't know if he's going to be able to get the most out of that group. For example, Laviolette wasn't that good of a coach, especially towards the end of his tenure, Nick, but how much more is Sullivan going to get out of that group?
It's hard to make 32-year-olds play hockey differently, and we'll wrap up on this thought. Trocheck, Zibanejad, Miller, and Panarin are all 32 or older.
Yeah.
Those are all guys who have 10-plus NHL seasons under their belt. You are not fundamentally changing how any of those guys approaches the game at this stage of their careers. You're just not going to change them, especially some of the instincts, some of the timing stuff. So Mike Sullivan's got a lot of work to do. They're back at it tonight against the Sabres. Sabres' first game of the season. I'll be very curious to see how the Rangers respond after a real dud on Tuesday. We are going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On NHL. When we return, We'll talk about whether or not Mitch Marner's a good fit in Vegas and a whole lot more. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss, because right now, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 bonus bets to use on the FanDuel app. I love using FanDuel because it makes however I want to play easy. If you want to put together a parlay for a squad ride to watch a game with your friends, if you're tired of trying to pick the game and you want to go into the player props market, or if you feel the momentum shifting underfoot the way it did in the Oiler game last night and you want to live bet the team mounting the comeback, FanDuel's got you. Very grateful to Leon Draisaitl, known money respecter, hit his over for points in the game last night. Midway through the first period, made sure I came out with something in that Oilers loss. Tonight, you got Eagles-Giants in what should be a pretty ugly Thursday night football game. So FanDuel has one question. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL as we are making our way through early season overreactions. Of course, most of these teams, except for the LA Kings, have only played one game. So keep that in mind as we debate these conversations. Next up on the list, I have the Golden Knights. And I wrote down, Mitch Marner will get the Golden Knights to be more of an offense-first team. And of course, they only played one game. But they were a lot more aggressive. I thought their defensemen were a lot more activated in the offensive zone. I thought they were making a bit more of a conscientious push to try and create offense as opposed to what we've typically seen from Bruce Cassidy teams that are a bit more defense first, a bit more control the tempo of the game. And I really liked what I saw. I know they lost in the shootout to the Kings, but I like the idea of Vegas trading a little bit of defense for some offense.
Well, one of the plays that Marner had that beautiful pass to Eichel, who had that one-timer. It's like, yeah, Nick, I can get used to that for a full season. Like that was a lot of fun to watch. And that was a great back and forth game, Nick. You know, you had the Kings up a couple of goals. Vegas comes back. Then they're up by 2 goals in the third. LA is able to tie that going into overtime. Then they win it in a shootout. Probably one of the best games of Wednesday, if I'm being completely honest. I could see that take coming to fruition as well. I can see a world where Vegas sacrifices a little bit defensively to try and create a little bit more. I know Bruce Cassidy, we all know he's known as a defensive coach, but I think now that you have someone like Mitch Marner, he's coming off a 100-plus point season, you can create a bit more while still playing stingy defense. Like I think you can sacrifice a little bit of that, but you can still play stingy defense in addition to creating more offensively. I think they'll need a trade for another defenseman at some point because Pietrangelo is hurt and he's not going to play this year. And I've been saying on Locked On Penguins, does that someone, Erik Karlsson or something like that? And I'm just throwing that out there because Vegas always loves to go to get a big name around the trade deadline. But still, I can see that one. I don't think that's really that much of a reaction, especially now that you have another elite player in your lineup. I mean, Dorofeev was fantastic last night. Again, Nick, I mean, Vegas' scouting with him has been amazing. Stone was great. Eichel was fantastic. I mean, Eichel had a 4-point game last night, for God's sake. So, you know, I like a lot of this lineup. And now that they have Marner, I can see them playing, you know, maybe some more 4-3, 5-4 games. And I know Cassidy's not used to that. He likes those 2-1-3-2 games. But now you added a game-breaking offensive talent. Use him to his full potential.
Next up, I have the LA Kings. And all I have written down next to the Kings is chaos ? That CC Dumoulin pair is special. There's no other way to describe it. You know, it's Texas Tech in like 2014. It is maximum chaos. Like when Cody CC calls his own number and tries to make a play, it's incredible. There's nothing like that in the NHL. You know, Mike Matheson does that on occasion where he'll call his own number, try and be a one-man zone entry as a defenseman. But this is the antithesis of what the LA Kings have been over the last 5 years or so, where they've been one of the best defensive teams in the entire league. They've relied a lot on their goaltending and their structure, and they got thumped on opening night by Colorado. And then last night they get in a 6-5 barn burner against Vegas. I'm very curious to see where the Kings ultimately end up this year, because this defense is just not what we've come to expect from them. And I don't know if they have the offense necessarily requisite with being able to overcome this defense.
They were one of the best defensive teams in the league last year. You get Ken Holland, and he even said, I'm going to sign some contracts during July 1st. Didn't know it was going to be both Brian Dumoulin and Cody Ceci. Nick, they were both second to last and last in average game score for hockey stat cards in that first game against Colorado. Not good, to say the least. And they weren't really good in the second game either. They got to, if they're going to play these guys, and it looks like they are all season, they're going to have to figure out a way to shelter them, because you're playing them in too many high leverage situations where they're just not those players anymore, especially Brian Dumoulin. There was a time when Brian Dumoulin was a legit top pairing defenseman who could shut down players in his own zone next to Crystal Tang. He is not that guy anymore. And you know what about Cody Ceci? There was a time when the Penguins actually used Ceci to his potential. They hit him on the bottom pair and they gave him easy matchups. And what do you know, Nick? He went out there and got a massive contract after he signed that prove-it deal with the Penguins. But teams are trying to play him in too high leverage situations. He's not that player. If you want to at least get a little bit of value out of him, you got to shelter him and give him some easy minutes like the Penguins did a few years ago. But teams are just deciding not to do that. As for the Kings, I think they are a playoff team this year. I think you're probably going to see them finish in that third spot in the Pacific again. And I think we're going to get Oilers Kings round 5,000 because we just keep seeing that every year. But until they show that they can beat the Oilers in a playoff series, I'm not going to take them to go that far in the playoffs. I know it's Kopitar's last year, Nick. I'm going to enjoy it. He's going to the Hall of Fame after this career. He's been absolutely outstanding, but I still think they need a little bit more help on the back end, and I think they could use a little more offensive oomph up in their lineup.
They need Byfield to really break out.
Yes.
That's really the only thing that I could see to really kind of change their real trajectory. Next up, I have the Chicago Blackhawks. Connor Bedard's in for another long year. I think
that is not an overreaction to me. I'm sorry. Nick, he has Ryan Donato and Andrei Burakovsky on his line. And I'm not trying to disrespect these two dudes. Donato had a really good season last year. But sooner or later, you got to get this guy some help. That's how I see it.
It's depressing, man. We're going on year 3 of this now, and I know they like Spencer Knight, who played okay on opening night. He was under siege in that game, and he did a good job of keeping them in the game. They gave Nazar the big extension. Vlasic has shown glimmers. They have drafted highly for several years in a row now. And there's just that next wave of guys to supplement Bedard just hasn't come to fruition. And of course, it's very early. It's very young in this cycle. But we're going to flush another year down the toilet of this team being a 65, 70-point team at best. And you're wasting time here. It's hard to get the best out of guys when they're in these environments. And you don't want him to end up being, the good player, bad team guy where he puts up 80, 90 points on a 35-win team for the majority of his prime, and you get nothing out of it because you alter a player's trajectory when that happens. And then real quick, for the Florida Panthers, check back in April. That's all I have written down. There's not a lot to glean from the Panthers regular season. At least I don't think.
No, I mean, this team is going to make the playoffs. And as again for Bedard, he also had Colton Dock on his line, but the point still stands, Nick. He just needs more help up in this lineup. Otherwise, you're just going to see the same thing with Chicago. And I didn't like some of the offseason they had. I think they could have been a little bit more aggressive. I know they were aggressive the offseason prior, but you don't have to be that aggressive, but you can still add a few more players to at least help your superstar player out. So I just want to see a lot more from Chicago. As for Florida, completely agree with you. This team is going to make the playoffs. I think they're going to finish top 3, despite not having Barkov for the full year. Tkachuk will be back, I'm guessing, around January or right before the Olympics, somewhere around there in that ballpark. This team is going to be totally fine as long as they don't have any other injuries. Bob is still very good. That lineup is fantastic. They can play shutdown defense. So I am not concerned. That's not an overreaction at all.
We are going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On NHL. And when we come back, Hunter and I are going to tell you, yes, actually everything is about the Toronto Maple Leafs. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL as we are making our way through early season overreactions after 2 days in the early stages of the 2025-2026 NHL season. Next to the Toronto Maple Leafs, I have written down, without Mitch Marner, the Maple Leafs power play will be mediocre or worse.
I don't think that's that much of an overreaction. I think it's going to be hovering around average to maybe a little bit above average. I don't think it's going to be one of the best units in the league, though. But, when you take away such a strong playmaker, also someone who has a really nice shot, it dampens your unit a bit. So they're trying to do the thing, Nick, where they're replacing it by committee. I'm not sure how that's going to work out for a full season. I think this team is still very much going to make the playoffs, but I still think, when it comes to their power play, Matthews, his release is disgusting. You have Nylander on there, of course. You can put Zararis on there. You can put Morgan Riley on there, et cetera, et cetera. But when you take away that great of a playmaker, I think it bumps your unit, at least right now, outside of the top 10, closer to average. But I can see a world where, again, it's a little bit above average. So that's where I'm at with that one. Really fun game, though, between Montreal and Toronto on Wednesday night. Toronto wins that game at home. They have the Jays game, of course, going against the Yankees. That was a lot of fun. But that was still a really fun game to watch as well when I was kind of going back and forth between games on my multi-view screen.
So speaking of that game, I have written down the Canadiens will be the most fun team in the NHL to watch on a nightly basis. And I think the Canadiens, pound for pound, are almost as entertaining as it's going to get from a style of play perspective, the types of talent they feature. The Habs are a very entertaining team to watch. Now, being fun doesn't necessarily correlate with being good or winning, but at the very least, I feel like anytime I turn the Habs on, I am going to enjoy it.
They don't play defense. That's probably the most fun part about it. It is all gas, no breaks under Marty St. Louis. And I love it. They lost last night 5-2. I still have the Canadiens making the playoffs this year. I'm not too concerned about it. I especially love the Noah Dobson trade over the offseason. But, I'm excited about Ivan Demidov for a full year. I think he's going to win the Calder. I'd be stunned if he didn't. Lane Hudson for another year is going to be great. Again, they added Noah Dobson to their lineup. Again, man, they still have some vets, especially like Brendan Gallagher. Oliver Kapanen had a really good game. Bolduc had a really good game last night, and I really like that move over the offseason. Again, you still have Slavkovsky, who I think is going to have another very good year. Gooley, I like a lot as well. You always love, Nick, the Mike Matheson experience. That there is nothing like the Mike Matheson experience on the back end when he decides, hey, I'm going to be him here, and I'm going to do it all by myself. I love Caulfield. I love Suzuki. You're going to see, I think, this team play a lot of, 5-4, 6-5 games this year just because they're not that good in their own zone. Marty St. Louis is trying to get them to be better defensively, but, until that happens, I think you're going to see a lot of high-scoring games from them this year. But they at least, in terms of the fun meter, they're right up there. I don't think that's an overreaction.
For the Colorado Avalanche, I wrote, Marty Necas will end up being the most interesting person on free agency July 1st.
I don't think that's that much of an overreaction because I think a lot of teams are going to look to pay him. Nick, we got to say it. Remember over the summer when we were seeing all these accounts being like, look at that 2026 free agency class. Can we get an update on that, man? All these players have almost signed now. Marty Necas is one of them that is going to be a free agent, of course. I think you might see him get a boatload of money. If he is, say, the second or third best free agent, hell, maybe even the first if you see more of these big-time free agents sign. We just saw Kyle Connor agree. We saw Jack Eichel agree. Obviously, Connor McDavid, etc. I think Necas could get a boatload of cash on a long-term deal this summer. And, I could see a desperate team or two trying to going to get him being like, hey, we think we're only a piece or two away. We want to ink you to a big deal here and have you be, our solution. So I don't think that's that much of an overreaction. If he has a really good year this year, he's going to get money that I don't think some people are going to see coming.
I was going to ask you a quick follow-up. Can you see a world where Necas ends up making more than McDavid, where he makes more than 12.5 on this next deal?
I won't go that far, but I can see
Okay.
I can see $10 million a year if
Okay.
if he has a great year this year, and that's a very distinct possibility because of how stacked the Avalanche are up front. I think someone can give him $10 million per.
Okay. For the Washington Capitals, I have the memories are fun, but this is going to be rough. I think the Capitals are an okay team. I think a lot of what they have accomplished has already happened. I think they are largely playing for vibes. I would love to see them augment Ovechkin as he tries and gets the whatever he needs. I think it's 50-something, 60-something goals to get the most overall playoff and regular season goals of all time as well. But that was a rough performance against a Bruins team that we don't expect a whole lot from. And I don't want to say they're deflated after the excitement of last year, but it's hard to recapture that energy. You know, everything went right for them last year, and there's not a world. I could see a world where they regress, they come back down to earth to some degree, and this season's a bit more of a slog. It's a lot more boring.
I think that's a little bit of an overreaction. I have the Caps as a playoff team, Nick. I just don't have them winning the Metro this year. I have them kind of third in the Metro where they don't get home ice in the first round and they play one of Carolina or New Jersey and lose. But I still think this team is a playoff team. I think they play stingy enough defense where that's going to keep them in it every night. They still have two goalies that are also going to keep them in it every night. And you have Alex Ovechkin, who is an absolute cyborg. I don't think they're going to be as good as they were last year. I mean, the PDO they had was ridiculous. I mean, they were finishing chances virtually every shift. It was crazy their shooting percentage was last year. Don't think it's going to be that. But I think when I look at the rest of the conference, I'm not sure who is going to take their spot in the playoffs. I know people could say Columbus, still TBD. People could say the Rangers, TBD on that for me. I still have them as a playoff team, but they're not going to be as good as they were last year.
Okay, the last team to hit on today's show, the Boston Bruins. It's going to be an interesting season. And by that, I mean, they have a wide range of potential outcomes because they have a handful of elite players. Those three elite players are good enough. As we saw, Pasta had 3 points last night. He looked great. McAvoy coming off the shoulder that kept him out most of the second half of last year. And Swayman with a full off season was one of the stars of the game last night. I think the Bruins will be pesky. I do not think they will be very good, but I do think they will stay in a lot of games by the virtue of having a couple of high-end guys.
Pasta is going to try everything in his power to will that team to all their wins this season. And Nick, you saw that on Wednesday. He was, I thought, their best player, and he literally willed them to that win. Yeah, McAvoy was great. Swayman was also great. That was a really nice start for him after a really rough year last year where, you had the whole contract thing, wasn't at training camp to start, yada, yada, yada. But Pasta is going to be the straw that stirs the drink there. And if he doesn't have it on a lot of these games, the Bruins are simply just not going to win much. I agree with you. I think they're going to be pesky. I still don't think they're going to be very good. I don't have them as a playoff team, but Pasta is going to try everything in his power to will them to a potential spot. Don't think it's going to happen, but he's an elite player for a reason, top 10 player in the league for a reason. You saw it on display against the Capitals, and he's going to need to do that a lot more times, Nick, if they want to somehow defy the odds and make the playoffs this year.
That will do it for this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. Thank you so much to everybody who made Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network where we've got your teams covered every single day. Be sure to check out the Locked On NHL Game Night guys, breaking down the action after it happens at the end of the night. Thanks to our presenting sponsor, FanDuel, and Hunter and I will see you guys next week.